In today's world of massive technical complexity, every great digital service has to answer a few key questions. How do we create a shared vision for a new system that everybody, and I mean everybody, can understand? How do we decide where to build it? And, probably the most important question of all, how do we guarantee it's actually going to work the way we promised? Today, we're going to lay out that entire blueprint.
All right, here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off with the architectural blueprint. That's our shared map. Then we're going to dive into the critical trade-offs of different cloud models so you know exactly what you're signing up for. And finally, we'll see how to craft a service-level promise that isn't just a document, but a real binding guarantee.
So, first things first, it's all about the plan. Before anyone writes a single line of code, we absolutely need a clear, shared vision. And to get there, we're going to use a really powerful yet surprisingly simple tool for visualizing software architecture, the C4 model.
And this, right here, is the fundamental problem we need to solve. Picture it. You've got business stakeholders, product managers, developers, architects, all in the same room. If they're not speaking the same language, you're just asking for trouble. So how do you bridge that communication gap and make sure everyone is on the same page?
Well, the answer is you create a set of maps. Think of the C4 model as our map-making toolkit. It gives us a simple, common language to describe a system at different zoom levels or layers of abstraction. This way, everyone has the right map for what they need to see. The whole C4 model is built on just 4 simple concepts. First up, the person. That's our end user, the human who's actually going to interact with the service. Second, the system. This is the big picture view of what we're building. Third, we have the container. These are the individual runnable pieces, like a web app or a database. And finally, the component. These are the building blocks inside each of those containers. We always, and I mean always, start at the highest level of abstraction. In the C4 model, this is called the context diagram. You can think of it as the 50,000-foot view, where you're looking down on the entire landscape from way up high. Now, this concept of the black box is absolutely crucial. At this stage, we deliberately do not care how the system works on the inside. For our business stakeholders, all that internal complexity is just noise. So we treat the entire system as one single box. The only things that matter are who's using this box and what other systems does this box need to talk to. The goal here isn't a deep technical design, it's alignment. It's about getting every single person in that room to nod their heads and agree on the scope before we dive any deeper. Okay, so once we've agreed on the blueprint, the what, it's time to decide on the foundation, the where. This brings us into the world of cloud hosting models and some really important trade-offs you have to consider. To really understand these models, let's use the famous pizza as a service analogy. It's brilliant. If you build on-premises, that's like making pizza at home from scratch. You're responsible for everything, the oven, the dough, all of it. Now, infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, is like buying a pre-made pizza crust. The vendor gives you the base, but you handle the toppings and the baking. That's your operating system and your application. Platform as a service, or PaaS, is like ordering a pizza for delivery. It shows up ready to go, you just have to serve it. You only manage your application. And finally, software as a service, or SaaS, that's like going out to a restaurant. You just show up, sit down, and eat. And all of this brings us to the most important point of this section. There's a fundamental trade-off here. As you move from on-premises over to SaaS, you're giving up granular control in exchange for convenience. On the left side, with on-prem and IaaS, you manage a lot more, which gives you more control but also way more responsibility. On the right, with PaaS and SaaS, the vendor handles more of the heavy lifting, making your life a lot more convenient. There's no one right answer. It's all about finding the right balance for your team. All right, let's move away from the simple pizza analogy and get into the real-world, high-stakes consequences of this decision. We're going to zoom in specifically on the IaaS model, where you choose to have more control, because with that control comes some very significant risk. You see, when you choose an IaaS model, your team is explicitly accepting something called the responsibility gap. The vendor provides the basic infrastructure, the physical servers, the network, but there's a huge gap between that and a fully working secure service, and it's your team's job to fill in that gap. Let's make this really concrete. Take backups, for example. If you're using an IaaS service like an Azure virtual machine, Microsoft guarantees the hardware will be running, but they do not guarantee your data. It is 100% your team's responsibility to set up, test, and monitor the backups on that machine. If you configure it incorrectly or if a backup starts failing silently, you could be looking at permanent, irreversible data loss. The vendor is not going to save you. And this slide shows another massive risk: security.
Yeah, the vendor secures their physical data center, but the operating system running on your virtual machine, that's on you. If a critical security patch for Windows or Linux comes out, your team has to apply it. And a missed patch isn't just a tiny mistake, it's like leaving the front door wide open for attackers to just walk right in.
Okay, so we've designed our system with C4, we've picked our cloud foundation. Now what? How do we formalize what everyone should expect? How do we go from just hoping the service works to actually guaranteeing it? Well, that requires a binding promise. And that promise has a name. It's a service level agreement, or an SLA. Now, this is not just another document to be filed away. An SLA is a formal, binding contract between the service provider and the customer. Its entire job is to clearly define the level of service that will be delivered, so there's absolutely no room for misunderstanding.
A really strong SLA stands on three main pillars. First, a clear service description. What exactly are we providing? Second, measurable service level targets. How are we going to define success? This is where you see the numbers, like 99.9% uptime. And third, stakeholder responsibilities. Making it crystal clear who is responsible for what on both the provider and the customer side.
But let's be honest, a promise is only as good as its terms. A vague promise is an empty one. So to make our SLA a real, actual guarantee, we have to make sure it's practical, precise, and, most importantly, enforceable. So that's the key question, isn't it? How do we take this idea of an agreement and forge it into a sharp, actionable tool that actually protects everyone involved? To do that, we need a framework. And that framework is SMART. It's a classic for a very good reason. By making sure all our SLA commitments are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, we turn them from fuzzy goals into an enforceable contract. Let's just look at a few of these in a bit more detail. First, being specific means zero vague language. We don't say, the service will be fast. We say, the customer's search page will load in under 200 milliseconds. We define exactly which services are covered and what the expectations are, leaving no room for argument later.
Next, it absolutely has to be measurable. There's an old saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and you certainly can't enforce it. This is where we put hard numbers on our promises, quantifiable things like uptime percentages or response times that can be tracked with monitoring tools.
And finally, a great SLA is timely. This means it includes clear deadlines. How quickly will a critical problem be resolved? When are we going to review this SLA to make sure it's still relevant? This creates accountability and ensures the agreement is a living document, not something that just gathers dust. So let's bring it all together. These aren't just three separate topics. They are three deeply interconnected pillars that form the foundation of any modern, successful enterprise solution. You start with the C4 blueprint, which is your shared vision. You build on top of a cloud foundation after consciously choosing your trade-offs. And then you protect it all with the SLA guardrails, your binding promise that makes sure the service delivers. And that's it. That's the complete methodology for turning a great idea into a reliable, guaranteed service. You now have the blueprint, the foundation, and the guardrails. So the only question left is, what are you going to build?